Hey, thank you. I've had the opportunity to speak at different places, different times, a few times from time to time. But I got to tell you, I have never spoken in such a creative backdrop as this one. This is creative. Thank you, Andrew. I understand that you put this together. Andrew, this is something this is actually a building project I probably could have helped with. It was like, no one's going to tell me, hey, can you nail straight boards? It was just, no, if it's straight, it's not going to work. But in any case, I want to talk to you today about the head of the home and a godly, supportive wife. I want to start by sharing with you a rather long quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and then I want to tell a story about two men, and then I want to make an application from that to you this morning. This is from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Remember, he was writing from the Soviet Union at the time, but an awful lot of what he has to say sounds like today. He says, there was a time when we dared not rustle a whisper, but now we write and read illegal stuff, and congregating in the smoking rooms of research institutes heartily complain to each other of all they are muddling up and all they are dragging us into. There's that unnecessary bravado around our ventures into space against the backdrop of ruin and poverty at home and the buttressing of distant savage regimes and the kindling of civil wars and the ill thought out cultivation of Mao Zedong at the time, he's thankfully dead, of Mao Zedong at our expense to boot. In the end, we'll be the ones sent out against him, and we'll have to go. What other options will there be? Had a discussion with a young man this week. What shall he do with his draft notice that he got in the mail? And they put whomever they want on trial and brand the healthy as mentally ill, and it is always they while we are helpless. We are approaching the brink. Already a universal spiritual demise is upon us. A physical one is about to flare up and engulf us and our children, while we continue to smile sheepishly and babble, talk. But what can we do to stop it? We don't have the strength. We have so hopelessly ceded our humanity that for the modest handouts of today, we're ready to surrender up all our principles, our soul, all the labors of our ancestors, all the prospects of our descendants, anything to avoid disrupting our meager existence. We have lost our strength, our pride, our passion. We do not even fear a common nuclear death. Do not fear a third world war. Perhaps we'll hide away in some crevice if it happens, but fear only to take a civic stance. We hope not only to stray from the herd, not to set out on our own and risk suddenly having to make do without the white bread, the hot water heater, and a Moscow residency permit, which at the time probably looked ridiculous to us in America. A residency permit? What are you talking about? Well, we're a lot closer to that kind of nonsense now. We have internalized well the lessons drummed into us by the state. We are forever content and comfortable with its premise. We cannot escape the environment. The social conditions, they shape us. Being determines consciousness. What have we to do with this? We can do nothing, we say. Pastor Matt and I were talking about that very thing yesterday. Our politicians will say to us, well, we know this is wrong, but it's the environment. It's our democracy. It's the system. Can't do anything. But we can do everything. Even if we comfort and lie to ourselves, that is not so. It is not they who are guilty of everything, but we ourselves, we. Some will counter, but really there's nothing to be done. Our mouths are gagged. No one listens to us. No one asks us. How can we make them listen to us? To make them reconsider is impossible. The natural thing would be simply to not re-elect them, but there are no re-elections in our country. I would argue ours either, quite frankly. Forget about the re-elections, I'm talking about the elections. In the West, they have strikes, protest marches, but we are too cowed, too scared. How does one just give up one's job, just go out onto the street? Keep in mind, this was written long before COVID. All other fateful means resorted to over the last century of Russia's bitter history are even less fitting for us today. True, let's not fall back on them today. When all the axes have hewn what they hacked, when all that was sown has borne fruit, we can see how lost, how drugged were those conceited youths who sought through terror, bloody uprising, and civil war to make the country just and content. No thank you, fathers of enlightenment. We now know that the vileness of the means begets the vileness of the result. Let our hands be clean. It wasn't that long ago, a few years ago, burning down buildings, toppling monuments, burning businesses, and murder. And it was sold to us as improvement. So has the circle closed. So is there indeed no way out? So the only thing let us do is nothing. What if something just happens by itself, but it will never come unstuck by itself? If we all every day continue to acknowledge, glorify, and strengthen it, if we do not at least recoil from its most vulnerable point. And what is that vulnerable point? Solzhenitsyn goes on to say, from lies. When violence bursts out onto the peaceful human condition, its face is flushed with self-assurance. It displays on its banner and proclaims, I am violence. Make way, step aside, I will crush you. But violence ages swiftly. A few years pass and it no longer is sure of itself. To prop itself up, to appear decent, it will without fail call forth its ally, lies. For violence has nothing to cover itself but lies. And lies can only persist through violence. And it is not every day and not on every shoulder that violence brings down its heavy hand. It demands of us only a submission to lies, a daily participation in deceit, and this suffices as our loyalty. And therein we find, neglected by us, the simplest and most acceptable key to our liberation, a personal non-participation in lies. Even if all is covered by lies, even if all is under their rule, let us resist in the smallest way. Let their rule hold not through me. Jesus Christ in John 8:44 said as much, did he not? He said, you're of your father, the devil. And then he identified him as a liar and a murderer. You can't have the murder without the lies. But if you embrace the lies, you will eventually get the murder. The two go hand in hand, as Solzhenitsyn is saying. So what lie am I talking about today? Here's the lie. Families don't need a head. We don't talk that way about anything else in the world. We'll talk about a CEO of a corporation. We'll talk about a general in the army. Any kind of organization, I don't care if it's Lion Clubs or whoever, there's presidents and so forth. There's a head somewhere. And then we argue that the one place that God has determined there be a head, or there is a head, the husband, head of his wife, that's the one place where we're not told about CEOs in the Bible, they have to have a head. There's a lot of things we're not told in the Bible in terms of organization. But the one place where we are, the family, we're told there is a head, and that's the one we want to argue with. Welcome back, Adam and Eve, right? You can eat from any tree you want, except for this one. Oh, let's eat from this one. What a lie. And I'm arguing this morning that Solzhenitsyn is correct. That one of the reasons why we buy the lie is because of the idea of the violence behind it. COVID is an example of that, right? Let's just go along. I need to keep my job. To fire someone from their job and take away his means of support for his family, that's violence. And so we have this covert violence just kind of hanging all over us here. We have to stand around and we have to act as if the husband is not head of his wife and his family. Don't need a head. We can have two-headed monster if you want. Or better yet, let's have the wife be the head. You see, they're not against the head of the family as long as it's the wife. You know, they're not against certain people acting like men as long as they used to be women, right? That's what we're up against. So I want to tell you a story about two men. We'll call them Watt and Bob. Watt was Watt, short for Watson. I had a prof named Watson. They called him Watt. I never did, but his friends did. Watt was a very wealthy man and extremely influential. In fact, he was so wealthy that he went up against some of the most powerful wealth creators of his time. Watt had a lot going for him. He eventually became a local judge because people trusted him for his insight and his knowledge. And of course, being wealthy didn't hurt too much either. So he was where the decisions were being made. People wanted to be his friend. And he was a guy that everybody wanted to be seen with. Had a little problem though. He didn't understand his own family. There's another man that I want to tell you about his story. We'll call him Bob. Bob was a little bit different. Bob was also extremely wealthy. He was also, like Watt, a judge. People came to Bob for justice. But Bob eventually had a problem. And one of the things we know about Bob, he was very serious about his family. It turns out that he worked very hard to support his family, to support his entire family. And although he was an extremely busy man, he had time for his family. He took time for his family. He made time for his family. He did this. He wasn't standing by the creek or wherever, just hoping things sort of work out. You know, isn't that our normal family thing now, right? Well, hopefully, I don't know. Yeah, I took the kids to youth group. What do you want? Hopefully they won't be axe murderers. I hope. I don't know. That wasn't the case with Bob. Bob took time and he put it into his family. Bob wasn't living by the lies that it doesn't matter who is the head and what kind of support you have from your wife. Doesn't matter. Things are just going to work out one way or the other. Go do your own thing, whatever you want to do. Well, things as they progressed turned out differently for Bob and for Watt. For Watt, the people that he had been with, the people that he had supported, the people that supported him as a businessman and as a judge and as a somebody that people took notice of, they eventually turned against him and wound up nearly killing him. What a scene. Boy, just yesterday you were somebody. Just yesterday you were a judge. Just yesterday you were a man of business. Just yesterday you were a man that people respected. And today, some of the same people want to kill you. We'll talk about how things ended up for Watt here in a minute. Bob also had his problems. Bob, who was a tremendous businessman, he was a man who, well, he was known for handing out justice. He was a man who was known for not judging something too quickly. He was a man who was known for searching out the case to see who was right, who was wrong, who had wronged whom. And the nice thing about Bob was his justice was available. It was right close. It was close at hand. But he had some problems. At some point, he lost his entire family. Lost them all. Well, lost all his children anyway. If that wasn't bad enough, shortly thereafter, through some kind of poison or something like that, he became so miserable that he could hardly sleep. And he had sores and boils, and he lost everything. Lost his family, lost his goods, and he went from, kind of like Watt, in one day he went from having an awful lot of means, being very wealthy, and before you know it, he had lost everything. The only thing he didn't lose was his wife. Everything else was gone. Well, what are we going to do with Bob and Watt? Well, you probably recognize the story already. Watt will change his first name to Lot. Lot finally found a way to stand up for principle, as was mentioned a little bit earlier. And when he stood up for principle, all the people that had been giving him all kinds of accolades suddenly turned against him and told him that if he doesn't deliver the two men that went into his house, they're going to be worse to him than they were to them. In other words, Lot, you turn those two over to us, or we're really going to give it to you. I mean, what happened to all my popularity? What happened to everything? And Lot, when we know the end of his family, he winds up in a cave, wife gone. See, his wife had no respect for Lot. Neither did his children. Lot was the man who had everything the world says you need to get. Money, influence, position, fame. And in the end, nobody cared. And in the end, he's so destitute that all he has left is a cave. Doesn't have a wife anymore, and 2 daughters. But what about Bob? You'll recognize him probably as Job. So we'll change his first letter too. Going from Bob to Job. Job, yeah, he lost it all as well. And I'm going to stick up for his wife a little bit here. A little bit. I know Job's wife is a pariah, but they lost everything in one day. And Job's wife never said a thing. Lost all the wealth, lost all the children, and Job's wife never said a thing. Now, she should have said what she said later. She encouraged Job to curse God and die, but Job, being a good man, a priest of his family, we know that from what we saw prior in the book of Job. Job doesn't call his wife a fool. She says, you're talking like a foolish person. He's been being very diplomatic with his wife, even in that horrific situation. Well, what kind of a father, husband was Job? Have you ever thought how intriguing it is in the very beginning? God says to Satan, have you seen my guy Job? And Satan, yeah, I know all about Job. I know about him. He is a problem for me. Well, what do we know about Job? God says he fears God, he hates evil. We know very little about Job, at least in the beginning. And later in chapters 30 and 30, I think 29, 31, around there, we found out more about him. But in the beginning, the chronicler tells us not that Job was this great, good, godly man because he was an influencer, had his own, 100,000 subscribers or whatever. None of that. You know what we get? We get what kind of a father he was. That's what we get. And very little other information. Later on, and towards the end of his argument there with Bildad and Zophar and a couple other guys, he begins to talk about his life before all this happened. One of the things he says when he was in the gates, he says something very interesting. It's just kind of slipped in there. You got to catch it. It says, my children were around me. You see, his children were not a impediment to his ministry. They were part of it. He didn't go out in the gates at all without his children. Well, guess who was taking care of things at home? I think he had a Proverbs 31 wife who knew how to run a home, right? Economy, we heard about that. House law. The word for a keeper at home in Titus, oika despotos. Oika, house. Despotos. A person who runs things. A person who does things. And in the Proverbs 31 case, her husband is in the gates. You see, they're not giving up anything. They're influencing the world and their family. And don't forget this, the children see dad influencing the world and they believe him even more. You want your children to believe you? You want that? Get out and fight. Take the abuse. You know, the abuse is a good thing. Because when you take the abuse as a dad, your wife and your children will believe you more. Why should they believe you when everything's cushy? Why should they believe you when all you do is stay at home and you never, ever take on the wickedness in the world like Solzhenitsyn's talking about? When you sit back, you say, well, I don't personally believe the lies, but I'm going to live like them. See, that's why Solzhenitsyn said, don't live the lies. Don't forget that. It's not enough not to believe the lies. You have to not live the lies. So even though we may not believe the idea that, this idea of the husband head of the wife and this kind of stuff, I don't believe that. That's a bunch of left talking points. Whatever. Yeah, but how are you living? How are you living? Well, how do things end up? Family-wise, for Lot and Job. Well, in Lot's case, like I said, things weren't too good there at the end. They were pretty bad. Lot had already been rescued by Abraham twice. I guess he didn't go back for a third time. We don't know what happened to Lot after that cave experience. He left no legacy whatsoever. But he had more advantages than Job had. He didn't take it on the chin like Job did. And yet, Job, a man who cared about his family. Job, a man of justice. Job, a man of wealth. And think about the two. Think about Lot and Job for a minute. Both were wealthy. Both were influential. Both were judges. One left a legacy, a good legacy, and the other left a terrible legacy. Can you imagine being the father of Moab and Ammon? Thorns in the side of the covenant people of God for years and years to come. On the other hand, Job, God restores his family. And interestingly enough, at the end, yes, we're told almost matter-of-factly how much goods Job had at the end, is camels and sheep and oxen and donkeys and so forth. That's almost incidental. But the chronicler gives us a little more information then. Says he lived to a ripe old age and saw his children to the fourth generation. Children, his children's children to the fourth generation. What a difference. One took his family seriously, the other one did not. One thing we know about Lot, he did not take his family seriously. And guess what? Surprise, surprise. His family did not take him seriously. He just didn't take him seriously at all. Remember, he knew that God was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So he goes and talks to his sons-in-law and like, get out of here. That's dad. He's going off again. I mean, I don't know what he's talking about. Job did take his family seriously. And he did leave a wonderful legacy. And think about it, my friends. They were both similar men in terms of what they had, in terms of what they did. But that big difference is, one acted as head of his family. The other one acted as if his family and wife needed no head whatsoever. My friends, we must not live by this lie. It doesn't matter if you reject what some of these egalitarian types say. They're not going to stay egalitarian for long. They don't mean that. What they really mean is, let's have the wife be the head. That's really what they mean. That's what they want. We have got to not live by that lie. Men have to take responsibility. It's not a matter of giving orders from a throne. That's not a matter of that. It's a matter of doing the right thing even when it's difficult. That's what it's a matter of. Who cares about doing the right thing when it's easy? Anybody can do that. Do the right thing when it's difficult. So men, husbands, fathers, future husbands, who's it going to be? Are you going to be a Lot husband, father? Or are you going to be a Job husband, father? The thing about Lot was it looked like he was influencing the world. He wasn't influencing anybody. Job, on the other hand, well, he still influences us today. Lot or Job? Which is it? No third way. Thank you for your kind attention.